The Trouble with Writing podcast, where we chat about the real issues that stop multilingual writers producing effective English and see where we can help.
Hi guys.
Hello
everyone, welcome.
Happy to be here.
Great to see you guys, and welcome to our audience. Today we're going to do a live editing walkthrough on some real texts to give you an example of what kind of feedback and commentary and annotation we do with our clients. Today you're going to learn how to ensure paragraphs make sound and insightful points, how to reduce wordy phrasing in text, cut some text, how to make your English text flow better and sound more natural, and how to make the most appropriate word choices. Sound good, fellas?
Sounds great.
Looking
Awesome.
forward to it.
Great.
We're
Well,
going to do our... Sorry.
go ahead, Phil, please.
I was just going to say, we're going to do our best to not run over here and to give you some sharp, insightful and quick editing things. But as writing coaches, I think we've all got a bit excited and come up with long passages to edit. So we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. We'll try to be brief here in the spirit of concision. Phil, why don't you kick things off? I'll just change the screen for you. If you're ready, I'm ready.
Yeah, I just need to share my document and then let's go. Okay. So, yeah, for people who do know me, hello, hi. Just drop a hello in the chat if you're here and you know who I am, or to anybody. And if you don't, I am a writing coach for content writers and copywriters mostly. Of course, people for whom English is a second language. So we're going to look at this text today and go through the steps that I usually go through in my editing process. And this was a text from one of my clients. And as you can see, it is a piece about design in the UAE. So this was written for a design website, which is quite kind of highbrow. So you'll notice some of the language is quite formal and posh, but that's right for the audience. So I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to just read these paragraphs. And my first step in the process is going to be to think about the content, to think about what should and shouldn't be there, right? Is there any extra information we don't need, or is there anything missing in this introduction to a blog? So let's take a minute to read it, and then I'll move on with my editing commentary.
Mm-hmm. Seems like a pretty good piece, Phil.
It's a very good piece. I should say this writer, and I didn't say this first off, this writer is a very high level editor. They comment on other writers' work and organize a lot of things for the magazine they work for. This is not really about correcting too many errors with the English.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about the content. We're going to talk about natural style and vocabulary, and maybe correct a few little things in this piece later on. So yeah, I hope everyone got an idea of what this piece is about, and maybe a few tinglings of sentences or passages which are repeated or not necessary. So as I said, my first step, which I've got on the next page, is how to edit for structure and content. So of course this is just a bit of the piece, and we can't see the whole thing, but I've decided just to show you the introduction to say what we might remove or add. So here we go on the next page. In lovely pink here you can see some of the things I've called structural changes, and the first is, well, I decided that new precedent, well, if something is a precedent, it's in some way new, so we didn't need that word, so that's why that's changed. There's definitely a word missing in this first sentence. Two birds with one stone is the idiom. And I've decided that some of the things in the first paragraph could be removed. So in this sentence, do we really need to know that it stores seating when in the next part of the sentence it describes the breakout table and seating? So that's one thing we could remove. Possibly I'll remove this sentence. I really hate the word stakeholders. It might be appropriate to get it in there later on as well. And in a way, this does lead the readers into pieces that kind of generates a bit of interest. I don't think it's really answered quickly enough. It's not 100% obviously relevant to me, because we start looking at the table, we then we talk about people involved in making the table, and then back to Gelfing, the designer. So that's why I decided to get rid of that, just make the introduction a bit shorter. We could remove this of his eponymous studio. I don't think it does any harm to keep it, but it's a bit tighter without it. And some of the other ways we could make this text a bit less wordy is to remove these expressions like is nominal forms, the something of something, the exuberance of being. Or we can just make that shorter. He was beaten at his own game. But as you can see, there's not a great deal of change, and I should say that these editing comments are my opinion. The writer doesn't have to follow these 100%, and usually on a call that I have with them, I talk about why I think it might be a good idea to add or remove certain things. There are some which are more strongly recommended, like this one. Okay, so on to the next step. We've looked at what we might need to add and remove. Now let's delve deeper into sentence structure, and if there's any corrections, maybe you've seen some. If you have, feel free to just drop them in the chat. Okay, so this is step 2 of 3, where we're looking at sentence structure. So we've got another correction in the headline. Set the precedent for is usually the preposition that goes with that. Yeah, shortage of storage. This was an interesting one that I discussed with the writer. This, I would say, is a style choice, because shortage is fine, that it has the correct meaning. But we've got two words very close together which end with the same suffix, age, shortage, storage. When sounds which are the same come so close together in text, it's a bit of a tripwire in the sentence. So we could make the first word shorter and choose a synonym, lack of storage. I prefer starting sentences with this rather than it. If it's linking backwards, it's important that the reader immediately understands what the subject is. And with the word this, that links to the main subject or thing in the last sentence. So that's a good tip for everyone out there. Just don't start sentences with it. That format also allows us to just remove a couple of these functional words, that and from. So that makes writing a bit tidier to my mind. I think the writer here was using hyphens as well. If you want to get a dash, you have to either copy paste or program your keyboard to make a dash. It's not a big change, but let's be accurate. So that's something I've highlighted as an error. Okay, continue on with style and sentence structure. This sentence, these are poo stools with through and through cavity that can be stacked and can be used. Well, that's passive voice. So I don't think there's anything wrong with passive voice in this. It's not incorrect. I certainly don't subscribe to the idea of like you have to make everything active voice. But if we can make it active, we can save words. So the poof stools can stack, right? They can do the action themselves, which saves us words, makes it simpler. We can also save words by, of their table, we'll turn that into an adjective word that describes the table stem. That's a good way to avoid too many of these prepositions. Good way to tidy up sentences. Serve various purposes. That's maybe a vocab thing. To serve purposes is a typical collocation, and again, it saves us on words. Okay, I hope everyone can still hear. Okay, Paul, am I sounding fine to you?
Yeah, it's fine.
Great, thanks. All right, we're nearly there on step 2. So final thing to talk about. Again, its production story. I think it's, when we use it as a possessive, can be a bit confusing to readers because we're not sure if we're reading a mistake or it is, or what is belonging to what. So if we just remove this and immediately tell the readers the production story, we don't need to mention it in the previous sentence. Half a dozen, if we look at the previous version, was hyphenated, but that's an error there. And I've also removed an exclamation mark. I don't think that fits in with the authoritative and high voice of this piece. I suggest sticking to commas and full stops. Don't know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I prefer that.
If we can remove exclamation marks, do it. All right, final part of my presentation on this text, and I hope I haven't gone through this too quickly, that you've been able to follow along. What we will do as well is make these docs available, or I'll make mine available for sure, so that you can check it out and have a look at my comments on the right there. So final step is vocabulary and voice. What might we want to change to make sure that this is exactly in the correct voice for the magazine and is addressing the reader in the right way? There's not too many changes here. We've already dealt with things like that passive voice. The first thing I highlighted was this: stack kills 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, it's a good idiom to use. It's the right meaning. It's well used, but for me, do you want the second word in your article, which is praising a furniture studio, to be kill? It's negative. It's got quite a negative connotation. Maybe if this was deeper into the piece, it wouldn't be an issue. But I wonder if the writer could change it and make it their own idiom or phrase. I came up with this: stack solves 2 puzzles with 1 piece. It's the same idea, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, but you could make it your own.
Yeah. A little less violent imagery.
It's I mean, it's not very original, is it? It's a little bit cliche. Also, kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Exactly. Yeah, we talked about this on a previous podcast, that it strays into the territory of cliche. So this is an example of something that I would chat with the writer about. And I think it's worth riffing on that and saying, what would you do? What could we think of? This is why it might be considered cliche or why it's too negative. There's often the way with these vocabulary and voice changes is it's about formality or it's about whether things are positive or negative.
That's a good point, Phil, if I can just interject. Although it's not literature, it is literary whenever you read anything. And an idiom like that has an image system attached to it. And that image system may not connect with the tone of the topic and subject matter you're dealing with in the article. As you pointed out, this idea of killing birds, the second word, that creates an immediate image for the reader. Whether they're aware of it or not, it's there.
And another interesting point on expressions like that is who's the audience here. If this is is the idiom the same in Arabic? I'm not sure. I know in Europe that the idiom varies greatly between like killing 2 flies with 1 hit, killing 2 rabbits, killing 2 birds, and in the UAE, I'm not sure if it's the same idiom. Maybe it is. But who's your audience, and will that resonate with them? Yeah, a couple of other changes. Sorry, Pete.
So I was just going to just finish that point that you either create negative imagery, or if it sounds too cliche, you don't create any imagery at all, right? So either way, you might not win with idiom like that.
And it's the interesting thing about editing and this kind of commentary is there isn't a right answer. We can guide writers and give our opinion based on experience, but perhaps that is something that will resonate more with readers. Who knows? So yeah, a couple of things just to finish off, and then I'll pass over to Pete, I think, with his editing commentary. Yeah, we have an adaptive seating arrangement. I quite like the word adaptive, but it was used earlier. Where was it? This adaptive furniture concept. So just to avoid repetition, got versatile. That's a synonym. We could just look in the thesaurus and pick out a word that we know how to use and that definitely fits the situation. And finally, this last sentence has over half a dozen stakeholders. So rather than it's this word stakeholders that I find it so B2B and so bland. Just think about like who would identify with the word stakeholder? Who would say, yes, that's me? Or like I would put myself in that category. It is this general word that we use to describe all the people involved in doing something. But could it be better to use those terms like designers, companies? So that's why I decided to change that. And in fact, it's made it a little bit longer. Stakeholders is more concise, but again,
but like you say, it's vague, isn't it? It's not very so yeah,
it's very detached.
A little bit abstract, a little bit, like you say.
Yeah, I think
specifically are they talking about when they say stakeholders?
The kind of designers and managers and procurement executives that are reading this magazine are they going to enjoy the word stakeholders, or do they come to the magazine to read about designers and cool companies and like innovative teams and things like that? Well, don't use stakeholders. That's my thing. So that's why I've decided to change that last sentence and made that suggestion. And I hope that goes some way to explaining the different types of things I edit for. So remember, if we go back up to the top, the first idea was I would read something through and see what it needs added or removed. There's no point doing fine editing if you say, hey, this whole paragraph isn't necessary, let's delete it. Then after that, we looked at sentence structure. So at a sentence level, any corrections on punctuation and such. And then lastly on vocabulary and voice. And it can be helpful to students and clients as well if you break it down like this. And especially if you say, hey, this is a suggestion, like this one. You don't have to change this, and maybe this one I strongly recommend you change because you've repeated the word. As I said, I'll make that available for everyone. I'll drop that in the chat in a second, and hope you enjoyed it. Drop a question if you've got one. Over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Phil. Yes, I totally agree with Phil there. So yeah, this is also when you're self-editing, right? I'll just share my screen. You want to think more about the macro, right? The paragraph, the text structure. Go to meaning, right? And do all that before you go to the fine points of grammar and style and this type of thing. I'll just share my screen. For the sake of time, I've actually skipped a few stages and I have actually gone to the micro stuff. Let's just go to...
That's going to work nicely, actually.
Yeah,
Let's,
so
Here
it
we
made
go.
sense to follow this order. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can everyone see that?
Yep, nice and clear.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I've taken a few examples from different clients. Yeah, one thing that Phil mentioned at the beginning about redundancy, right? So one common mistake is to use pairs of words where one is redundant. So for example, this client wrote, like in any other industry, working in tech doesn't promise or guarantee anything. So when you have two words that are synonyms, there's little difference. Arguably, it's not worth using two words there. I mean, if you then refer back to that idea, you can then use a synonym, right, to avoid repetition. But here it seems like a waste of a word. Let me give you a couple of other examples. So it's things like redundant pairs. For example, if you write something is fulfilling and enriching, or something is stressful and overwhelming. So it's best just to choose one of those words. And often, quite often, one word is actually implied in the other word. So for example, something that is overwhelming is also stressful. So in this case, you might be best just to use the word overwhelming, right? Because that includes stressful within that. So that would be one point. And if we go on to the next one, yeah, we talked about avoiding wordy phrases. So if you read this, it says, with an apparent goal to encourage its member states to pay for national missions. Besides, so the client wrote, in addition to their regular contributions to the organization's budget. So there are quite a lot of linkers that are more formal and usually the long ones. So, you know, often if you're writing for a broad audience, they just take up space. They just can make your writing drag a little bit, make it sound too formal. You know, other examples are things like furthermore, right? Usually, if you're writing for a broad audience, you would favor the linker also. Or this is a very wordy linker that I've seen a lot. In spite of the fact that it was raining, we went to the beach. Right? Wordy phrase, and you can just use one word. Although, right? Although it was raining, we went to the beach. Okay, so yeah, try to avoid wordy, formal linkers in your writing if you're writing for a broad audience. Here, so this client, she wrote Poland earmarked 197 million euros the agency's activities. Okay, so earmarked, this is a low frequency word. In fact, if you look up one one tip here is that you can check words in online dictionaries to see marked as formal or if they are marked as low frequency. For example, the Collins dictionary. If I just click on this, maybe I can. Does that come up? Am I sharing that, or do I need to reshare?
Not sure.
No, it doesn't come up.
You need to switch the screen. Go to Collins, and it should be a thing that says share this screen instead.
Yeah. Hopefully that should, yes, come up here. Okay. So in Collins is quite useful dictionary because it tells you immediately the word frequency, right? For example, in the Cambridge dictionary, it will often mark words like this as formal. Collins will also tell you the word frequency. So you can see it's just a 1 in word frequency. So back to this one again. So yeah, you want to choose words that are a little bit more familiar for your broad audience. One tip here is that can be very useful. So a good alternative here would be set aside. Right? Poland set aside 197 million euros for these activities. So this means earmarked means designated, right, or set aside. Set aside is a more a less formal word. And as I say, phrasal verbs can be very useful alternatives for more formal language. For example, the word eradicate is quite formal. Again, if you look that up in the Cambridge Dictionary, it's marked as formal. It's got how many syllables? Eradicate syllables. You could use, so instead of saying eradicate corruption, you say stamp out corruption. So these phrasal verbs can make your writing sound, a little less formal, a little more conversational. So, yeah, learning phrasal verbs is going to definitely be helpful. Okay, just move on to the next one. So, and this is probably the most important of all of them. So, as I said before, you always want to start with meaning, right? Before you go on to style is something too formal. First, think about meaning. And a problem the client, so she chose the wrong preposition here. So she said, in light of the challenges posed by dwindling student enrollment, I urge the university to reconsider its decision to scrap the journalism course. So in light of actually means because of. And that's not what she wanted to say, right? So she wanted to say despite. So despite the challenges posing student enrollment, I urge the university to reconsider its decision to scrap the journalism course. That makes much more sense. So be a little bit careful. She may have used in light of. I don't know if it was an attempt to sound a little more eloquent. I don't know. But just be very careful that when you with your choice of words that you say exactly what you mean. And yeah, final point here. So in the same paragraph, she said, instead of viewing declining numbers as an insurmountable obstacle, we should see it as an opportunity to innovate and adapt to changing circumstances. So again, I've focused mainly here on word choice, style, formality. Insurmountable, that's 5 syllables. Again, if you look this up in an online dictionary like Cambridge, formal. So again, you want to for words that are a little less formal, that are immediately going to with a broader audience. So something like unbeatable, an unbeatable obstacle. It sounds much better. So again, one of your goals is to sound natural in your writing, to resonate with broad audiences. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to to focus on. Comments, Paul, Phil, on any of these points?
Loved it. I wanted to
Yeah.
pick up on the syllable thing you mentioned. This is one tip that I think, we'll all know, but everyone listening might, is like whether a word sounds formal or long or clunky or wrong in English is often the number of syllables. It's not how long the word is. It's not, necessarily where it comes from when it was used. It's like how many syllables has it got? If we can reduce a 5-syllable word to 2, that's great. It's generally a good idea in English, and it's like helpful for readers and better for the tone of voice. So yeah, just wanted to comment on that. When you
That's
said
a really good
insurmountable, I
point.
was like, oh yeah, too many syllables.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that when we read something, we're kind of speaking it in our mind, right? And pronouncing it in our mind. So sometimes the multi-syllable word, or even an awkward combination of consonants or something, kind of sounds awkward in our thoughts. So similar rules that apply to speech also apply to the reading process, because we're just kind of speaking in the privacy of our thoughts, right?
That's right. You can imagine the reader slowing down, right, as they maybe trip up over that word. As I say, instead of viewing declining numbers as an insurmountable, you can kind of imagine them slowing down, right?
Yeah. Very nice. The word choice and the phrasing is really important. I like how you zeroed in on this, Pete.
Yeah. Okay,
Do you have any
guys.
questions from the audience?
Yeah, any questions? Yeah. Can see if
I think we have
few comments. I don't know if we have any
Let's just
questions.
let's
Maybe
say
we
a
can
quick
do-
hello to everyone. Go
We
ahead,
can do
Phil.
questions at the end.
Yeah, I don't see any
Or if
anyway.
you-
That's
if you
fine.
want to do your presentation, and then we can have a
Yeah,
chat
sure.
about editing
Yeah.
at the end.
Good
But
idea.
yeah, hello everyone who's there.
Okay. It's my turn. So what I usually do is I work with academic writers, and that ranges from high school students to college undergraduates and even to professors whose native language may not be English. And initially I was going to present an example of a professor whose writing I've worked with. But then I thought, after seeing your examples, I thought, no, I'm going to backtrack and work with someone who's starting out with their academic composition learning and sort of address some of the unique things that they deal with. So this is an example from a person whose first language is Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, and who is in high school in Canada. So they're doing all their work in English. And there's some interesting things to see here. And what I'm going to do, I don't have comments already, so I'm going to put them in here live and address a few things. So it's a dense paragraph, but it isn't necessarily that long, I think. So it's from an essay assignment that basically asks you why companies should provide comfortable chairs. And one of the things a student learning composition learns early on is how to write a topic sentence that establishes the subject matter and your particular thesis or view on it. And I think they do a nice job of that to start this paragraph. They say, first of all, a comfortable chair can improve office employees' efficiency. And I like that because they're starting the paragraph off very nicely. And so what I might do in my feedback is I like to offer something very positive at the beginning to set the tone, because I might get a little bit more critical later on. And I often use this, I used to use a great program called Kaizena, where I could actually attach video clips and other things. But it's no longer available for some reason. But there's an add-on for Google Docs where you can leave voice comments. So I might record a little comment just saying, hey, excellent first sentence. It establishes the topic nice and clearly. Well done. And then I might move into a few more criticisms. But the thing about a sentence like this that's really powerful is it makes a promise to the reader. It tells the reader, I'm going to talk about this, nothing else. This paragraph is going to focus on what a comfortable chair how it can improve office employees' efficiency. And so from that point on, I want this writer to cohesively address that topic. One of the things that allows cohesion, that kind of glues the idea together, are what I like to call keywords. And they're usually right there in the first sentence. So what I would do with my writer is I would highlight them. Here's a keyword. Comfortable chair. That's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about employees' efficiency. We're not talking about pizza or ocean fish. This paragraph is about these things. And by the way, these are nouns. And nouns are physical objects a lot of times. And a physical object creates an image. And so what I would tell my writer is, okay, we have good keywords here. Do not use synonyms. Synonyms are effective for other words, for example, adjectives, as some of you guys mentioned, or verbs. But once you establish keywords, especially if they're physical objects that create an image for the reader, I want to use those repeatedly. That's where I think repetition is powerful, because it cohesively maintains the focus on, in this case, comfortable chairs. I want to see comfortable chairs. And right off the bat, when I read through this, I see the tendency, and this is a tendency for a lot of language learners when they're starting off, because they've been taught to use lots of synonyms and because they want to learn vocabulary, and their teachers encourage that. But in terms of competition, I want to sort of reel that back a little for them and let them know that, okay, synonyms are good. You want to have a massive vocabulary, but we also want to use them judiciously. So for example, here, we also have the keyword office. So that gives us a sense of the physical context we're talking about here. And in the second sentence, they use the word environment. Right away, I see a new synonym for office, environment, which immediately can confuse a reader thinking that now we're talking about the natural environment, like the forest or the beach, instead of using the word office. So I would definitely put a side comment here and saying, use the keyword office. Continue that thread of keyword. Why? So that the reader always knows you're talking about office space, not environment space. And a student might say, well, it's a synonym for office. It can be, if you make that clear, but why use it? There's no harm in repeating the word office. And they go on to use a few other synonyms that could be misleading, right? Here we have the chair. We have the word chair repeated, so that's good. We still know we're talking about chairs. But down here we start to see the synonym furniture. Are we talking about furniture in general, or are we only talking about chairs, right? And we see this synonym here. We see good equipment. Each time those words pop up in the paragraph, it can mislead us thinking that now we're switching the topic, which you don't want to do within the paragraph. We could have another paragraph about the other office equipment, computers, desks, but here we want to be focusing on comfortable chairs. Why? Because that's what you promised in the first sentence, right? So I urge them to try to avoid, once you establish key words, use them repeatedly. That adds cohesion. Synonyms are useful, but especially with physical objects, nouns, they can be tricky and misleading because suddenly we have a new picture in our mind, especially when they're more general words or vague words like furniture or equipment. Well, to every reader, that's going to create a different picture. When I think of office equipment, I think of the equipment I've experienced in offices I've worked at. But Phil or Pete might create an image of office equipment in offices they've experienced. So we want to be precise in our choice of keywords. The other thing I see here with keywords is that they talk about workers' backs. Okay, so we're focusing now on the health of a worker's back. But later we also introduce the idea of neck, which kind of comes as a surprise at the end, although the neck and back are obviously related. Introducing a new word like that kind of takes us in a new direction. Oh, now we're talking about necks. So that's what I want to say about keywords and not being afraid to repeat keywords. I think, guys, we've said in previous podcasts about repetition being a sort of something we want to avoid in general, and use it sparingly so that when we do use it, it has impact because we haven't repeated all over the place. And for a learner who is still learning the language and still developing vocabulary, I think this is a piece of advice for composition and writing that comes as a surprise to them, because as they're being taught the language, they're being taught, learn vocabulary by trying synonyms. So sometimes it's a little counterintuitive for them to grasp this initially. But for me, it's really important for cohesion, for focus on the same thing. The other problem with changing the keywords, it's misleading for a reader, obviously, as I've said. It can also mislead the actual writer. Their ideas can start straying from focus because that one word they've chosen has tricked them into a new direction. And they associate other words and ideas with that new word. That can be a problem. I want to talk about something else that's happening in this paragraph that can be a problem. Especially in academics, we often hear this discussion about whether we should use first-person pronouns like I, or we should maintain more objectivity and use passive and use objective language. And it all really depends on the assignment. If it's an informal assignment, your teacher or professor may allow first person. If it's a highly formal academic paper, that may not be appropriate. It may be more appropriate to focus on the topic, comfortable chairs in this case. But one thing you don't want to do is switch between them. And there's a bit of that going on here. If you look at the first sentence, which again I consider a promise or a contract with the reader, the topic is very clearly established. Grammatically, the subject is comfortable chair. So I expect to be talking about comfortable chairs, not I and how I feel about comfortable chairs, or the manager of the office. I expect the focus to be comfortable chair. Yet, down here, we start shifting, and suddenly we see this word we pop up. And that hasn't been established. That's a really abrupt shift in focalized narration, in a sense. We're going from talking about comfortable chairs to now we're talking about we. So I would tell the student, if your professor is comfortable with first-person pronouns and writing in this assignment, this particular assignment, that's fine. However, you should introduce this a little more smoothly with a phrasing something like, in a personal example, we could spend a whole day. So because you're shifting from objective tone of talking about comfortable chairs to talking about personal experience. And there's no such transition here. Another thing I see happening here is in two instances, we have examples being introduced, and this is a really common problem. Students are obviously taught they should include examples in their writing. The problem is they're often not taught what an example is. And an example should be a specific real-world piece that makes clear something you've said earlier that's more abstract. Right? We want to shift from abstract or general ideas to specific concrete ideas. And if you see what they have here, we have a sentence preceding the example that says, which may help them to achieve higher business success. Higher business success is a bit abstract, right? It's conceptual. So an example would help. Maybe some numbers or data, productivity data. But instead, they introduce an example which is actually just more abstract explanation, right? They provide more revenue for the company because they achieve more work result. That's not an example. That's more abstraction, more concept. And down here we have this phrase, good equipment. And then immediately following that we have, for instance. So I'm expecting an example of good equipment. Instead, I get a little story, a little narration, which is also kind of abstract. We could spend a whole day sitting on it. That's not really an example. So I would point out to my students, when you use examples, use them from the real world. Names, places, dates, specific numbers if you have them, or something that I can picture like a little movie. Concrete examples, real world details that make the abstract explanation more clear. That's the purpose of an example. There's one more thing I want to mention here. And this is, I agree with everything you guys have said earlier, and that's why I don't want to repeat them. I would always start with content and idea flow, and then move to the micro of the sentence and the vocabulary and the grammar. And in some cases, they can use tools to help them with things like grammar or punctuation. But in this early draft, I always focus on content and the flow of the idea, the presentation of the idea. One of the things I always teach my students is this. Even if you're a good reader and you can read quickly, as all three of us can, being native speakers, inside the brain, the reader is understanding and learning your idea one word at a time, right? In this paragraph, we start with the word first, then of, then all. Now, it happens very quickly in the brain processing, but it does happen in that sequence. Therefore, I always want especially my beginning writers, to learn to explain ideas in a sequence that's logical, because the reader will absorb them in a logical sequence. And the logic can be either conceptual logic, or in the case of verbs and actions, it could be chronological. And when it's out of chronology, in terms of the actions that they represent, it can be confusing for a reader. And we have a little bit of that here in the first couple sentences. This piece that I've highlighted, pay attention to the verbs as I read this. Rather than walking around in the environment to take multiple rests per hours, from feeling tired by sitting in front of the computer for over 2 hours or more, so we could finish more work in a day by a good quality chair, can improve the efficiency by supporting workers back physically and reducing resting time in a day. I would ask my student, which of those actions that you've presented in one sentence, which comes first? I would say that feeling tired by sitting in front of the computer in a bad chair is the thing that happens first, right? If we change that and gave them a new chair, should come next, right? And that would reduce resting time. Oops. That would reduce the resting time by supporting a worker's back, and that might result in productivity or efficiency. They do a similar thing down here. Where is it? Provide more revenue for the company because they achieve more work result when they spend more time in the chairs comfortably and get seats from the company because the company decides to provide good equipment. Well, which of those happens first? The company decides to provide good equipment. It happens first in real life but they've presented it last in the sentence. And in fact, provide more revenue in real life, in the office, that happens after. That's the last thing that happens. So this sentence, the logical order of it is actually backwards. And yes, grammatically, the sentence can work in any linear chronology, grammatically speaking. But for a reader to absorb the idea, it's much more elegant if the ideas are presented in the sentence in the order they would happen in reality. And that's something that I'm always looking for, because I always try to emphasize the reader's experience of your writing. And even though it happens fast, the absorption of the ideas, it does happen in a logical and sometimes chronological order. And I know what happens when students are writing. The ideas don't necessarily come up in logical order. They come up in as you write. But in a second draft, that's your opportunity to reorder them in a way that presents better for the reader. I don't want to spend any time on this in terms of the grammar or the... there's some redundancy here. There's some odd choices, but I wanted to focus on those kind of things because those are kind of things I like to address in a very first draft. Because as you guys have said so clearly, there's no point in addressing grammar and spelling when you're going to change the whole sentence or paragraph anyway. So that's kind of what I've addressed in my initial pass through of this piece. Do you guys have anything, any comments or any thoughts on that? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's interesting hearing your slightly different approach to what we offered, and very useful for academic writers. I wonder if you have like a corrected version of that paragraph that you could share with everyone. Just, I mean, not necessarily now, but just so people could see what the transformed writing might look like.
It's actually in process right now. With the students' permission, this is something that was just given to me this week. And I didn't want to, some of the feedback was a little more personal, so I didn't want to include that, so I've copied and pasted this raw document. But I will once the revision is done and the student is very comfortable sharing it, but I'll definitely do that. And by the way, I've worked with a student for a long time, and they really do a diligent job of revisions and editing, and their second or third drafts are so much better every time. It's remarkable, actually. So although this might seem a bit awkward, I can almost guarantee you that the second draft will be something that will look almost completely different. So anyone who feels discouraged by the overwhelming amount of feedback they get, I always urge them to remember, as writing coaches, we're doing all of this work to make your ideas as successfully delivered as possible. So if you have 20 comments on your Google Doc, it doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It means you can be a great writer.
Means you have a good coach.
We hope so. Well, lads, that's all I have to say on that. Any final parting words before we sign off for the day?
Pete?
Just say that all the things that we've been talking about today, you can take them on board also when you self-edit too, right? So when you get feedback from other people, whether they are coaches, colleagues, friends, whatever, this also helps to raise your awareness so that you can self-edit your own. For example, we touched on redundancy today. That's something that you can look for in your own writing when you read. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that
Absolutely.
there's a lot that you can do on your own once you receive feedback. Feedback also helps you to raise your awareness so that you can self-edit.
It's a great
Good
point,
point.
Pete. Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Just going to say super quickly that that's also my big tip is, create an editing checklist. Like if redundancies is something you have been brought up on, then have a list and some resources stored away in some easy to access place, and have an editing list, which is like, hey, remember to check for redundancies, remember to check for topic sentences or whatever it is you're trying to do, and have this process to help yourself edit.
Absolutely.
Great point.
Brilliant. Yeah, I often tell my students that by receiving so much commentary, it's training them to notice those details. And long after you're gone as a coach, they're going to hear your voice popping up as they write. Oh, Phil would tell me to do this, and Pete would tell me to cut that word, and they'll do it. Right? You're teaching them to self-edit as you provide this feedback.
That's it.
Great.
Well-
Well, maybe we can call it for today. We all have to
Indeed.
get off and do our Friday things.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming to everyone. And if you have
Yes.
questions that we didn't have time to answer, feel free to message us or contact us.
Yep. Once this recording goes onto our social media, please contact us, offer your comments, your questions, and we'll address them.
Brilliant. All right, chaps.
Great.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
and
Great.
everybody
Thank
up
you.
there, keep
Thanks,
editing.
audience.
Keep editing. Right on. Okay. Cheers.
Cheers. See you all.